Joe Biden just nominated violent criminal thug Elliot Abrams to diplomacy commission in Washington, D.C. This is absurd. Even that notorious weaselly Biden bro, Mehdi Hassan, is upset about this. He's still going to tell you to vote for Joe Biden, though. Elliot Abrams is an unelected swamp monster that we can't get rid of. Elliot Abrams worked under Ronald Reagan, where he waged an insane genocidal campaign against socialists in Central America, including backing fascists who was killing and executing Marxists in El Salvador, including all their family, their friends, women, and children. During Ronald Reagan's brutal proxy war, the fascists that he was supporting committed a massacre in El Paso. Here is Elliot Abrams lying on behalf of the Ronald Reagan administration in order to cover for those heinous crimes. This is another example of Joe Biden being just like Donald Trump. Donald Trump hired Elliot Abrams to be a special envoy in Venezuela, where the Donald Trump administration tried to overthrow their government. Elliot Abrams was also hired by Trump to be the envoy to Iran, where they pulled out an Iran deal and continued to escalate tensions with them. Joe Biden put this guy on a diplomacy commission. Notice how both parties, Donald Trump and Joe Biden, love this violent criminal thug, Elliot Abrams. Hey, Donald Trump, whatever happened to drain the swamp?
That was the video I made on Hotspot. You guys see that Nico made those videos as well. Big shout out to Nico House the GOAT. Because I like that new format. Good luck defending Joe Biden after watching that video. Right? Because you can't defend it. Hiring a violent criminal thug like Elliot Abrams. And you guys know why I call him that. Because whenever the working class commit petty crimes, the media is out. Fucking thug, violent criminal. And I proposed this in our show. I think was it with Due Dissidence? I think we'll do Dissonance. Where you guys know how they say RFK, the anti-vaxxer. No matter what the story's about. The story could be about literally anything. It could be about climate change. It could be about healthcare. It could be about his bad stance on Israel-Palestine. But they will lead the article with RFK Jr., the anti-vaxxer. Whenever people talk about Jimmy Dore, they lead with Jimmy Dore, the anti-vaxxer. So I propose that we imitate the way they speak about their enemies, right? So when I talk about the ruling class, we should call him, and I like this article here, when they say Biden nominates Death Squad backer. That's his title. That should be his title. So when we refer to members of the ruling class, why don't we do that? Right? Some people like Elon Musk. How about Elon Musk, the union breaker? The union buster Elon Musk. The union buster Jim Crow Joe. The war criminal Jim Crow Joe. The police state building war criminal Jim Crow Joe. You can go all day with these titles. What's popping, Andrew? We got my boy in the house. Give me a thumbs up when you're ready. There we go. I'm going to introduce my dad. I got a lot to talk about that. I'm sure Andrew got a lot to say. Jim Crow Joe does it again. Have Elliot Abrams to diplomacy panel. And based on that short, you guys see how ridiculous that is. What's popping? I got my great friend. I met Andrew down in Seattle. You guys see him on the show a few times. A great leftist intellectual and activist. Welcome to RBN, my friend.
Thanks for having me on, Nick. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, absolutely. I hear you great, man. Thank you for joining me. Feel free to just chime in or interrupt anytime because I'm explaining to, and I implore people, other proletarians, especially post-duopoly leftists, right? Anyone who post-duopoly, call these people by the same titles they call us. Yeah. So you already see anyone who's demonized by the media, conspiracy theorist RFK Jr.
Yeah.
Anti-vaxxer Jimmy Dore. So I'm like Jim Crow Joe, fucking police state Kamala. But go ahead, Andrew, if you have any reactions.
No, I think it's a good tack to take always. If you can control the language that's acceptable for people to use, you are controlling the thoughts that people are allowed to have who have not yet learned about these issues and learned the history of someone like Elliot Abrams backing the Contras, which are nothing more than mercenary fascist death squads. So I agree. And I put in the chat a second ago, I said Elon Musk, the Bolivian coup plotting colonizer, because
That's
that's
a
what
good
he is.
one.
And
That's a
you
good
know,
one.
we can't get way too caught up in always being in a space of propaganda and media. It's very important, but when we're there, we have to be setting our own linguistic boundaries that are truthful and to push back on that. So I think you're taking exactly the right approach to, how do you even deal with just first of all this title and Elliot Abrams being taken from Reagan to Trump's administration to Biden's administration. We'll call him what he is.
He's a violent criminal thug. That's what they show. That's what they always refer to our people as, right? There would be a white family. There would be a husband who would shoot and kill his family. And they would show a family picture of him smiling. A black kid, he still Skittles, and they were like, "Look at this thug criminal." So if you disagree with me and you want to call working class people who may make mistakes criminals and thugs, who's the biggest criminal and thug there is? You would think it's someone like Elliot Abrams. Jim Crow Joe is the Don. The biggest criminal there is made up of the ruling class. Is accepted by the ruling class. When you look at the body count of this guy, whenever I talk about the video, you mentioned this as well. He played a very significant role when it comes to lying to the media in El Salvador. As I mentioned in this video, you would have Marxist revolutionaries. There was a lot of Marxist freedom fighters and guerrillas, to be frank, that was waging a revolution against their country that had massive popular support. So one of the ways that the fascist government quelled this uprising and was obviously in a very violent way, because they was ran by fascist people who was 100% down selling out the people to the West, and they coordinated with the Ronald Reagan administration when they was waging a proxy war, and Ronald Reagan worked with the media in the United States to set this narrative that the violent fascists was the good guys. And they was actually they were trying to resolve the conflicts peacefully, but even though the Marxist guerrillas was making things complicated because they keep engaging in violence, but even though the narrative was completely different. And this was shown multiple times when you had independent journalists that would travel to El Salvador. They're like, no, you had the government that is executing not only just the protesters, the Marxist guerrillas, they was executing their family, their friends, anyone who has sympathy towards the revolution was executed violently by the government. And there was a massacre in El Mazote that resulted in hundreds of unarmed civilians being massacred by the fascist government. And this narrative completely the narrative that the Reagan administration was completely false, and it was shown based on what's going on the ground, where they was pretending they was backing the good guys, because Reagan wanted to wage a proxy war in Central America. Now, what does this sound like? Isn't this funny how history repeats itself? Because you have the Biden administration and the Western regime backing Zelensky and the violent fascist thugs in Ukraine. And you have a media complex that's trying to erase their crimes. And that's the same thing that happened. Same thing would happen. And guess who was there who gave a testimony? Elliot Abrams said that he was like, I was down there at El Mazote. Yeah, I looked at the evidence, and based on the evidence, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. That's what he said.
You can think of him as I guess, analogous to Ron DeSantis or Colin Powell. This is literally, but all three of these men's jobs is to lie to the public, to cover up for the most barbaric war crimes, crimes against humanity that the U.S. commits on a regular basis. Colin Powell covered up the My Lai massacre. Ron DeSantis covered up torture in Iraq and Guantanamo Bay. And Elliot Abrams, these people are recycled. And like you said, you could repeat that as many times as you have breath for in a year if you're telling people that you need to know history or you'll be doomed to repeat the same mistakes. I mean, it's literally the same people even. We haven't even gone far enough for Elliot Abrams to die and someone else to replace him for this job. People's lack of historical context is really crushing in the U.S.
Elliot Abrams, and we're gonna cover this later. He was in multiple administrations. He was just in Donald Trump's administration, and that's why I laugh at Trump and their supporters who continue to spread this myth that he was any sort of anti-establishment fighter. He hired Elliot Abrams as Iran and Venezuela envoy, but we get to that very soon. I want to show you guys what he did. In one of the many ways he complicit with genocide. He waged many campaigns to overthrow democracy in Central America and South America under his time under Ronald Reagan. So I'm gonna read this part here. I'm gonna see what's a good starting point. I'll start from here. In January 1982, just as the Reagan administration was preparing to make its very first certification, the White House found itself faced with reports of a massacre in the village of El Mazout in a tiny guerrilla-friendly canton, Morazan. And then they went, and you had New York Times and Washington Post that reported on the incident where hundreds of unarmed civilians have been murdered by the Salvadorian soldiers. So the journalists literally said they didn't see the massacre, but they saw the corpses firsthand. So now this is when it gets interesting. You see how evil the United States really is. And they don't really care. They knowingly back in the wrong side here. The same thing with Ukraine. So instead of seeing this massacre like, holy shit, man, we need to change course. We have to care about human rights. The administration and its allies went to war with the reporters and their publications to try to prevent the story from mucking up their proxy war. What does this sound like? Isn't it hilarious how history mirrors current and present day? If you don't know, if you don't know the pattern of evil that our empire wages, you get caught in this cycle. You don't know what the fuck is going on. When you see what the Biden doing in Ukraine, I immediately saw what they was doing. I immediately saw the proxy war machine starting up again. And this is Ronald Reagan, who was desperate to wage a proxy war in El Salvador to counter communism, socialism, and the influence of the Soviet Union. Now you have the same situation in Ukraine where the West want to counter and weaken Russia, span the influence of NATO, and waging a proxy war in Ukraine and threatening everyone in the media who dare report the truth. There was a story about the Nazi in Ukraine. The New York Times having to admit that many people in media don't even want to talk about the obvious fact that the U.S. government is funding Nazi Ukraine. There are many pictures and photos of them, and many of them don't want to say that because they don't want to be labeled a Putin sympathizer. They want to be demonized by the government and by the media cronies, and that was exactly what happened in this situation here. So I'm gonna get to his quote. Here it is. I'm gonna scroll down because they explain how the Reagan administration tried to spread propaganda. They try to plant stories to journalists. But here's Elliot Abrams, baby-faced Elliot Abrams, only 1 year older than I am at this point in his life. 33 years old, up and coming neocon. Was Reagan's assistant secretary of state for human rights and humanitarian affairs. Unbelievable. He was assistant secretary of state for human rights and humanitarian affairs. Also took up the cause. And this is what he said. He said, El Mazout is a very interesting one in a sense. The El Mazout case is a very interesting one in a sense. Because we found, for example, that the numbers, first of all, were not credible. Because as the Secretary Anders notes, our information was that there are only 300 people in the canton. And Abrams' argument was deliberately misleading. News report has been clear. The mass killing has taken place in several hamlets. So he was like, there's a hamlet that got 300 people. And they're like, no, they killed all the people. What the fuck are you talking about? But he knows, but his job is to lie on behalf of war criminals and genocidal thugs that the United States is arming, that we're still doing to this day. What we're still doing to this day. And you have Donald Trump, who this criminal this thug, Elliot Abrams, who lied under the Ronald Reagan administration. Trump, who said he was going to drain the swamp, brings him on as the Iran envoy. And you guys know the Trump administration implemented a tough stance on Iran, pulled out of the Iran deal. And now Joe Biden doubled down on those policies as well. And then they hiring the same guy from Iran. And then you had the Trump administration that hired this guy as the special envoy to Venezuela, where Donald Trump personally wanted to launch an invasion, which is why it's absurd that people pretend that he's anti-war. You had the Trump administration brag about the economic devastation brought upon by sanctions and actively team up with Bolsonaro and launch military operations in the state of Venezuela. But this guy was hired by Joe Biden for diplomacy.
It's
anything you want to add real quick, Andrew?
Yeah, for anybody who might still want to, cape for Donald Trump and apologize for his, really terrible record in his first term, that wasn't just a random accident that he put Elliot Abrams as a diplomatic figure in contact with Iran and Venezuela. Iran would be very familiar with how the U.S. was using people, literally the same people, including Elliot Abrams, to intervene in their affairs and to, spread weapons around that region of the Middle East in that same period that Elliot Abrams was caping for Iran-Contra and covering that up and covering up the massacres that our proxy forces were committing in Latin America. We were using that conflict. We were spinning momentum off of our conflicts we were managing in Latin America and using that to interfere with Iran. And similarly, Venezuela absolutely understands what Elliot Abrams was doing in Latin America. And Trump couldn't do that on accident in any scenario. He knew exactly who Elliot Abrams was. He was probably being advised of what a menacing message this would be by his other, military and State Department advisors that Trump picked for his cabinet. He picked only swamp dwellers. And he picked, in this case, the perfect one if you wanted to send the most destructive and menacing message to these other countries, and you didn't care. You wanted to let them know you don't care at all about international law. You don't make any apologies for the violence that our country did versus these specific regions in the 80s. So here's your old friend Elliot Abrams again. You have to sit down with him and make nice with him in diplomatic meetings.
If you are one of those idiots that believe that Trump is an anti-establishment fighter, I'm asking you, who's the crazy radical hire? Where are they? Where's the person that said, I want to end the military industrial complex, I want to take on Wall Street, and he was banned from jobs, and Trump was like, I'm going to take a risk on this crazy renegade. It doesn't exist. You got Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, Steve Mnuchin, Steve Bannon from Goldman Sachs, Nikki Haley, who's appointed to the UN under Trump. Can we emphasize John Bolton, Mike Pompeo, and Steve Mnuchin? And people still think he was some guy who, he just trying his best. He just couldn't get it done. Well, look how stupid shit is that. Who believes that? And that's why I have funk with, and I debated MAGA communists over that, because that's an absurd take to believe this guy was anti-establishment. And this is the receipt I was talking about earlier. Trump blasted for naming war criminal, Iran-Contra convict, that criminal thug, Elliot Abrams, as Iran envoy. He drained the swamp, though, according to MAGA. And you guys know that Joe Biden likes him, too. I thought Joe Biden and Democrats, I thought you guys was against MAGA communism. MAGA Republicans. I thought you guys were against MAGA Republicans. That's what Joe Biden always says. We got to fight against MAGA Republicans. Who's the biggest MAGA Republican you think of? It's someone like Elliot Abrams, who designed MAGA foreign policy, who was given jobs by the MAGA administration, who has the ideology of MAGA. So you guys are fighting MAGA Republicans, but you guys giving Trump appointees jobs. You guys see how it's really a unit party? And I always have to emphasize this because you guys notice in the comments every once in a while, you see right wingers who click on the video because we shit on Democrats. Your side is just as bad. They on the same side. Trump was friends with the Clintons. He was friends with Mika Brzezinski and Joe Scarborough. He's part of the club. You are not. And that's why hires like these is one of the things that exposes the two-party system more than anything. Because if you're Donald Trump, you have one bad hire, and you're telling you want to talk about drain the swamp, you have one bad hire, okay. Over and over again. Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, Steve Mnuchin, Steve Bannon, Nikki Haley. And God knows who else I'm forgetting. Stephen Miller. God knows, like, there's so many swamp monsters there. If it's not just one mistake. And no matter what happens, really, it's going to be good narrative-wise whether Biden or Trump wins. Because I can't wait to laugh at Trump supporters again. If Trump wins, and he's going to sell them out again. And I'm going to laugh at the people who still bootlick them the same way I laugh at them now. The same way I laugh at the people who still bootlick obvious frauds like Bernie and Joe Biden and the Democrat Party. If you're part of the Uniparty, we are post-duopoly leftists, you're a clown, right? And I'll just read the subheadline here. Elliot Abrams has made a career of lying and committing criminal acts that have led to the death and suffering of innocent people from Guatemala to Iraq. Man, so many states that he's fucked up. Hard to get to them all in a segment, right? So you had people like Mediasana called Biden out for this because it's so obviously bad, but they're still gonna vote for him. They're still gonna, like, at what point do we start shaming people for voting for someone who appoints Elliot Abrams? And what you say, Nick, come on, what are you talking about? You can't do that. That's me. Andrew, imagine the shit I would get if I was like, yeah, I'm voting for Donald Trump. Bro, I would get right through the cold, son, if I was a Trump voter on the left, right? They're like, oh my God, are you enabling the right-wing fascists? Which would be kind of true, right? But people vote for Joe Biden, who does all the things that Donald Trump did. Hire the same fucking person Donald Trump did. Double down on his Iran policy. Double down on his Israel policy. Double down on his policy on Venezuela. All these escalated the military-industrial complex. Funded ICE more. Funding the police more. People vote for Joe Biden. That's okay. That's okay. Come on, man. What can you do? Now, if I vote for Trump, will I get that? Will the same attitude be shown to me?
No, there's no, the scales that are used are weighted differently. And in the case of somebody like Biden or Trump, depending on who's actually evaluating their behavior, they don't weigh their actions at all. It's all vibes. It's all entirely made up perceptions and, you know, Hercules Disney movie type motivations that people put in the minds of the politicians that they, you know, really want to attach themselves to.
Yeah, we just want consistency, and no more of the weak post-duopoly movement where you guys are like, yeah, we Grizz voters, but it's all right if you vote Biden. No more of that. Are we gonna do we actually care about building this movement or not? At what point do we draw the line and saying, like, are you either helping us build a third-party mutual aid movement or you're not part of the team? And I don't view the people like Crystal Ball and many other people who said stuff like this, like, yeah, it would be great if we had a third party in America. It would be great, but we're not there yet. So what are they waiting for? They're waiting for us to build it. Then they're going to jump out and be like, oh, yeah, I want to be on the team now. We're winning. None of that. So I'm going to show you guys this clip. This is Elliot Abrams being called out by a friend of the show, Dan Cohen. We had him on multiple times. This is a fantastic clip. And he put the description here. Convicted criminal Elliot Abrams' appointment to Biden's State Department makes me think back to when he threatened me in the streets of Washington, D.C. for asking difficult questions. We are ruled by unrepentant sociopaths. So this is the older clip. So let's pull it up because this is the kind of pressure that Elliot Abrams should be facing all the time in the streets, because in our system, criminals like him of his magnitude are not punished. He's above the law. So
We're skeptical about you because of your history of using humanitarian aid to send weapons to Contras in Central America. Do you have any comments about that? There are a lot of people who are very skeptical.
No. Could you leave us alone, please?
I'm doing my job. You are too. What
I'm
do
actually walking, so I would appreciate it.
what do you have to say about that?
what do you walking have to do with anything? So is there like some rule that if you walk in, people's First Amendment rights don't apply? You guys see the disdain that Western authoritarians have towards the free press? And why I roll my eyes whenever people talk about Western values, Western democracy. Everything is a fraud. These are the leaders of our society, have been for decades. He's been in multiple presidential administrations, and he had complete disdain for the press. The same disdain he's seen during the 80s, during the Iran-Contra. Let's continue.
You have to say about your criminal convictions for lying to Congress?
Well,
Mr. Abrams, the people want to know. The people want to know why you see yourself as qualified for this. You lied to Congress. You're convicted of crimes. Mr. Abrams, the people want to know, why did you lie to Congress? You were pardoned by President Bush. Will you apologize to the American people for lying?
you're going to need to leave us alone, or we will actually have to have a speech.
We're both in public. That's what you're gonna.
Sorry.
You're gonna wait. What are you gonna do? You're gonna have what done? Elliot Abrams apparently just threatened me if I don't stop walking next to him on this sidewalk.
You see how much they hate these freedoms and democracy that they claim they hold dear? And this is something that's critically important for me and us, the people who claim they are Marxists, to do, because Marxism is a science, which is essentially a critique of capitalism and Western democracy. And the reason why people aren't at our position, the reason why people cling on to Western culture and Western democracy and pretend it's better than the others, they pretend Western democracy better than the savages in Africa, better than the savages in Brazil. You guys know that Western chauvinism? Better than the savages in the Middle East. No, it's not. And there are many ways we can explain and break this down. This country is not founded on these freedoms and free press that you guys think they are. That's why we arrest journalists. That's why we support states that arrest journalists like Ukraine. That's why the elites in our culture have disdain toward journalists like Dan Cohen. Look at the disdain they had towards the Gray Zone and many other independent journalists who call them out. Because at the end of the day, they have disdain towards the freedom of the press. In the West, not the communist states that they criticize, are deeply authoritarian. And we're gonna get to more examples of this because we in near the end of the story. But I'm gonna show you the authoritarian impulses, as they call it, that come from France and Emmanuel Macron threatening social media censorship, and Joe Biden being straight up called out for Supreme Court censorship. So I know, I think CJ covered that a little bit, so we quickly brush over that. Andrew, any last thoughts on this story before we move on? And this is the theme of the show. We're going to expose Western hypocrisy and how they are the quote-unquote authoritarian states.
Yeah, just the last thing I would say is, one of the things I really appreciate that RBN always does is go back to learn what we can from, ongoing, current, and historical people's movements, especially of people who have been fighting, front line against colonialism. And there's a great documentary that you can watch on YouTube for free called In the Name of the People. And it was a few American journalists who stayed with and filmed with the FMLN, the Revolutionary Forces in El Salvador, in the mid 80s. And so you get to see about their politics and their tactics and how they are interfacing not only just with people who already say that they have a prepackaged political ideology, but they were going and working with people with no political power at all and working with, peasants and indigenous peoples and building this very effective movement. And so I would highly recommend people watch that documentary. It doesn't take too long. There's good subtitles, so you don't need to know Spanish or anything. But that's all I'd really add is, go and learn about the people that Elliot Abrams was helping to murder in the 80s. And you'll find multiple useful things in there.
So, In the Name of the People, El Salvador Civil War. That's done. We can't play it, and you highly recommend it. And I definitely got it. I definitely got to save it and make sure I check it out. So make sure you guys watch this great documentary on the Civil War. Definitely trusted Andrew vouched for it.